Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I pay tribute to the honourable member for Glasgow East, my constituency neighbour, for securing this debate, and spoke very powerfully about the impact that this will have on the city of Glasgow and further afield. Listening to my constituency neighbour's comments, I was reflecting on the picture in Glasgow. So there's 5 Santander branches in the city of Glasgow, by my calculation, yet the 2 that have been earmarked for closure are in Springburn, in my constituency, and in Parkhead, in the for Glasgow East's constituency. Now, they just happen to be the 2 worst areas in Glasgow for social multiple deprivation. And that leads me to look at the wider programme of branch closures that have happened. So my constituency in the last 4 years, there's been 4 branch closures now. So that's 2 in the Royal Bank of Scotland, 1 in Denniston, 1 in Postle Park, directly opposite my constituency office, and also the Clydesdale Bank in Springburn, just around the corner from the Santander branch earmarked for closure. And that means the only branch left will be the TSB in Denniston and in Springburn. So we're really down to some of the last banks in the poorest communities in Scotland, which is a great tragedy. And I'm looking at extrapolating that observation across the country. What does that say? Of the 5 branches in Glasgow, Shawlands, Byres Road, and Argyll Street and Sauchiehall Street are staying open. They are quite prosperous parts of Glasgow. Now, I think it's because the current accounts held in those branches are much more valuable to the bank. That's simply it. It's a profit-seeking behaviour that's happening, and there's no legislative imperative for the bank to correct that behaviour. Therefore, it will seek to maximise profit at the expense of its customers. Yes, I would give way.
Very grateful to my constituency neighbour for giving way, and it was a point that I for reasons of time, that I omitted from my speech, but one of the things that I learned when I was speaking to the staff was that actually we had a mortgage advisor in Parkhead, but apparently because they weren't doing a roaring trade there, they took them out 6 months before the decision to announce the plans to close. So it does absolutely back up his point that these decisions are made entirely based on profit rather than serving the people that are in those communities.
Accept the observation. And to be fair, as a millennial, I suppose, my interaction with an actual branch is limited because I've adopted new technology. I use the banking app for I'm with the TSB. I use the banking app, despite some difficulties recently with their technology transfer from Lloyd's TSB, using the banking technology. The only time I visited a branch related to any substantial business was when I was taking out a mortgage about 3 years ago in Denniston. But you make the point, if you're going to cut the cloth, you're going to almost create a self-fulfilling prophecy by stripping out key banking services like mortgage provision, which is a great problem. Yeah, I have to give way.
I thank the gentleman for giving way. He's making a very solid point about deprivation. Some of his branches and my branch in Alloa are some of the most deprived parts of our country, and yet they're having the services taken away. When Santander is considering, and other banks considering these branch closures, they look at depravity, they look at the levels of deprivation in a constituency, they also have an index. Don't you think that, does my honourable gentleman agree with me that index should be made public, and actually we should put the access to banking standard on a statutory footing so these closures can have real consultation and be far more transparent?
A rare collegiate moment for the Chamber, perhaps. I agree entirely with that, and I was just about to come on to that issue. When I met with Santander management last week to discuss the closure of Springburn, I made that observation that I recognise exactly why you're doing this, and they didn't deny it. And I also said, yes, there needs to be total visibility about the economic impact and the disparity in terms of demographics of where these banking closures are happening, because there's no visibility of that pattern. In America, it was recognised long ago, in the 1970s, in fact. There was a practice called redlining. So banks in America would deliberately blacklist poorer communities and withdraw banking services. The Carter administration in 1977 proposed the Community Reinvestment Act, which was passed in America. And as a result, banks in America that are commercial banks are obliged to redistribute their profits into sponsoring cooperative banking services, mutuals, and also to promote credit unions. Therefore, there's a much more diverse range of banking services in America as a result of direct government intervention that dates back to the 1970s to redistribute those services. So as a result, Santander's operations in America, as a result of the Community Reinvestment Act, means that in the next 5 years, they will be investing £11 billion in the Community Reinvestment Act to sponsor cooperative banking, mutuals, and other sustainable banking activity. That's a hefty redistribution. And that is exactly in stark contrast to what happens in the United Kingdom, because there's no legislative imperative for the bank to do it. Therefore, we need to address that yawning chasm in legislation. And I think that needs to happen. I absolutely agree with it. And I look at the contrast, actually. So right next door to the Santander branch, formerly the Abbey National branch, and I made that point as well about the root cause of a lot of these problems is increasing monopolisation of the banking sector in the UK. So we've got 5 major clearing banks in the UK, which together have 85% of all current accounts. Contrast that to Germany, where there's 400 local Sparkassen banks and over 1,000 cooperative banks. Clearly the picture is very different there because there's legislation in place to distribute the holding of capital in the banking system. So it's much more sustainably done, much more responsive to local communities and also sectors of industry. Therefore, you have a much more healthier and balanced economy. I made the point about Santander. Its origins lie in the Abbey National, which was demutualised in 1989, the same year I was born. And we've seen a pattern of demutualisation across the banking sector. That's been a negative thing that's happened in the UK economy, and I would seek to, in legislation, reverse the demutualisation of the British banking system. Yeah, have to give way.
Isn't it particularly galling that a bank, which used to be a building society with a sense of a social conscience, is inflicting this huge series of bank closures on our local communities?
Absolutely. And a stark example of the exploitation. We see it in multiple fronts. You know, we see it in universal credit, we see it in job centre closures, we see it in post office closures, but we also see it in things like fixed odds betting terminals and bookmakers being concentrated in poorer communities and poorer high streets. And we also see it in stark contrast in microcosm in Springburn Shopping Centre, where right next door to the Santander branch is a branch of Bright House, which is a rapacious lender exploiting the poorest communities in our country, which should be illegal in my opinion of their practices, just as bad as the payday loan lenders. So there's a good example right there in a microcosm of what's wrong with the British economic system in Springburn, writ large. And we need to address that. I hope the Minister would reflect on the reality. He's welcome to come and visit my constituency and see what it looks like on the ground. If we don't fix it, then we're going to entrench economic division, alienation, and the sort of tensions and social tensions that exist in our country that might have erupted in the reason why people in so many numbers voted to leave the European Union, because they saw it as a source of their frustration, our economic system that doesn't serve their interests. This all actually is connected. There's a complex interdependency. We need to address the wider tensions in society. And this is just yet another example of what's wrong where the state withdraws from regulation and permits basically neoliberal practices to prevail. That's a major concern, and we need to address it. The bank in the case of Springburn, justified its closure programme by saying there's a 25% reduction in football. No doubt, I accept, as the member for Barrow said, that there is a technology change, the industry is subject to disruption, but the curve is way ahead of where people are at in the ground. And that's what the government should be involved in, closing down that curve so that it reflects the real transitions that people are having, particularly elderly people and demographics such as disabled people who are not going to be as readily available. And in the case of the branch in Springburn, the claim was 91% are using a variety of other ways to engage with the bank. But that includes phoning up the local branch to ask, make an inquiry locally. It also includes using an ATM. These aren't mutually exclusive activities, and clearly that's a questionable statistic. Also, a minority of users, only 46% of customers at Springburn use another Santander branch, the nearest branch being in the city centre of Glasgow, an expensive bus ride away for many people, particularly in a community which has a very low car ownership rate. And also a minority of the customers, only 49%, use online mobile or telephone banking services. And the Springburn branch is proposed to close in June this year, yet the lease on the branch via Santander won't expire until December. So we're already, for sure, going to have 6 months of it being a blight in the community, the boarded up frontage. That's something I'd like the bank to address as a minimum, making sure there's a transition if they are going to close it. But I would appeal to them to recognise their social responsibilities. It's ironic as well because today, at 2 o'clock this afternoon, the Springburn Regeneration Forum kicked off in my constituency, right across the way in Springburn Shopping Centre from the Santander it's proposed to close down. And this was a community-led approach to try and bring the community council and other stakeholders in the community together to try and plan the regeneration of Springburn. And what blow, right away, in the same day that's happening, that the bank across the way in the Springburn Shopping Centre has announced it's pulling out of that community. I think it's a real sad reflection of a lack of social conscience on the part of our commercial banks. That needs to be addressed, and if it's not going to be addressed by them voluntarily, it should be done through legislation. And that's, in a nutshell, what I think is wrong with the UK banking system, what the Minister might want to reflect on in terms of addressing it, and I'm sure our front bench will do that as well. As a cooperative Member of Parliament, as a Labour Member of Parliament, we are committed to a massive restructuring of the UK banking system in favour of cooperative banking, mutuals, and a more equitable form of financing our economy. That's what we are supporting.